Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Todd Smith from Fair Oaks Ranch PD in Texas. This is his 30th year in law enforcement, and honestly, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. He's a little bit of a wellness legend, and I'm gonna coin that term for him. So welcome to the show, Chief Smith. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Paige. It's great to be here.
Of course. No, I've really been looking forward to this conversation. Last time we talked, I know that wellness has been a big part of your life and your career for a long time. So I'm looking forward to diving into your insights and your experience with that. I think that, if we're going to talk about humanizing law enforcement and getting to know the human behind the badge, I would really love if we could start with more information and background on who you are and maybe what your life looked like before law enforcement.
Sure. Fifth generation Austinite, born and raised in Austin, Texas, and but first generation law enforcement or police officer. I started off with a family in the restaurant business, and so my dad owned a couple of restaurants as well as managed many restaurants from the time I was born up until recently. And so I grew up in the food service or customer service business. So that gave me a pretty healthy foundation in customer service and anticipating the needs of complete and total strangers. So I felt like that was a great foundation when you get into public service. And I was in the restaurant business. I became a manager at the age of 21 years old. I then became a retail manager. I was traveling around the country, opening up stores, worked my way into a vice president role on this national retail company. And at the time, though, I had a very close mentor and friend of mine. Was his family also. His name's Ernie Hinkle, and he was a lieutenant in the Austin Police Department. And so from the time I was 19, I met him, and I just was amazed at the quality of person he was. And I come from a background like everybody else of, the only time you'd see a police officer or interact with a police officer was during a traffic stop or a cove party that was broken up, and it involved a lot of condescending lectures and big talk, and there was an air about police officers that I just thought was rude. And it just wasn't my personality. And when I met Ernie, he was a lieutenant at the time, and so he was in his late 50s, and I would go for a ride along with the police department. So even though I was in the restaurant business, even though I was learning how to manage people in the start of my leadership journey, at the same time I would go for ride outs. And he understood that I was not going to really understand the actual nuance of the job unless I was with younger officers that were my age. And so, for instance, one time I said, "Hey, can you make a traffic stop? I want to see what that's like." And he did make a traffic stop, but he couldn't do anything because he forgot his reading glasses when he went up to talk to the person he pulled over. And so when he got a driver's license handed to him, he couldn't even read it. And so I was all excited about, what are we going to do? And he just says, nothing. I just let him go. And I was like, okay. But he introduced me to some younger officers fresh out of college, and I watched how they talked to people. I watched how they used empathy with the general public, complete strangers, and it really spoke to me. And after a 10-hour shift, again, even though I was, entrenched in my own professional career in management and traveling the country and doing important things, I thought at least, I always thought, man, I can't believe you guys get paid to do this. And I think just having a helper personality, I was just always drawn to a radio or a computer that has access to every single person in your area that needs help. And he eventually convinced me that I was meant for something greater and a higher calling, if you will, and that being public service as a police officer. And so 30 years ago this month, I graduated from the Austin Police Department Academy that was 8 months long. And I started my, what I consider to be a storybook career.
I love that. I love that ending, a storybook career.
It really has been.
Why do you think that helping people has been something that's so important to you? Like, if you had to really self-assess, why was that something that was a calling for you?
I think just as an early at an early age, I just realized that if I lended somebody a helping hand and they said thank you for it, it just gave me a little feeling that I couldn't describe, but it made me feel good, and it just made me want to help somebody else. And I could just remember being a young rookie. Shoot, even long past my rookie years, anytime the radio would go off or the computer would send me to an address, the just being able to help everybody was so fascinating to me and so rewarding to me. Maybe it's just a dopamine injection that's an IV that's just constantly going of I forget to drink, I forget to eat, I forget to go to the bathroom because I'm so focused on helping the next person. And with that, there's going to be some disagreements, some altercations. Unfortunately, taking somebody's rights away from them when you actually have to make an arrest and take them to jail. But at the same time, I always found the good in it, and I think positivity is such a huge aspect. Just for we're going to talk about wellness, and I think that positivity, if you can find positivity no matter what you go through every day. I think it's just important to remain positive. And so I was just one of those, super happy guys. I'm used to having to pay to work out. I'm used to having to pay to go to school. I'm used to having to pay to go to the range to shoot or, you know, um, take, karate lessons or combat lessons, self-defense lessons. And here I am in the academy getting paid to do all of that. And so I just really would wake up, grateful every day. And I didn't know a lot about the benefits and the retirement. And I never really thought anything about politics at the time and how that could affect policing with city leaders. I just could not wait to go out there and, have some action and be with a lot of folks that I cared about and single-minded purpose of let's go protect people, let's go help people, and hopefully ultimately I think we all want to make a difference no matter what we do in our lives.
The one word that you said was grateful, and that was what I was thinking the entire time is having this sense of gratitude and empathy and a positive mindset. And we know that some people, because every person within the organization is going to be different, right? Different personality,
Right.
different walks of life. And one of the questions that comes up a lot is, if someone isn't inherently that, how do you train that? How do you teach someone to have a positive mental attitude? How do you teach someone to have gratitude? How do you teach someone to have empathy for people? Is that something that you think is a trainable skill?
I think it is a trainable skill. It certainly helps to have some self-awareness to be able to take the criticism, if you will, and you need to look at criticism as investment. If somebody is criticizing you, hopefully you realize that they're taking the time to invest in you and they want the best for you. And, I've had a lot of conversations over my career on, let's just step outside of what's going on right now and think about what negativity does. We both know that negativity and positivity are both contagious. We
Mm.
also know that people don't choose very often to be around negativity. They don't want a negative leader. They don't want a negative manager. Usually, a negative manager means a manager that's going to be in a bad mood, is going to be micromanaging to you, is not going to be thoughtful and caring of you. So, we tend to search for leaders that are positive. We want to be around that type of positivity. And so I think it's important in our leadership journey that we try to figure out what can we do to always be positive. And I've always found that starting with an attitude of gratitude is really the best. And just show up and look at as much positive as you can in the world. Just look at it through that lens of positivity. And so, yes, I've been told that, I'm definitely a glass half full kind of guy. But at the same time, I've been around folks that, they're walking through the door and you're wondering, what side of the bed did they wake up on? Are they going to, I had a chief one time. I didn't know if he was gonna come in for a hug, or if he's gonna come in with an elbow to blame me for all the crime that happened in my bureau last night.
Mm.
And I feel like, as a leader, I need to always be steady, and I always need to be positive, and I always need to lead by example. And just in all honesty, the people that are the most negative, they tend to just like reach in and suck my soul out. And so I'm just not surrounding myself with a lot of negative people. And in that vein of honesty, I wish that only positive people would, with positive attitudes, would get into this line of work, because we do get it from all different directions, whether it's administration, whether it's through, negative social media, whether it's just dealing with difficult people that are, experiencing their worst days. And then, we see some very traumatic events unfold right before our eyes. And I think if you have a healthy relationship with your mental health, with your emotional health, and I know we're going to get into wellness and the holistic aspect of wellness, but it goes way beyond just kind of showing up with a good attitude, because you're going to be bombarded throughout a career, and you need to figure out ways to handle that and take care of yourself, because there's no way you're going to be able to take care of others if you're not prioritizing yourself first and your own wellness.
There are a few things that I really appreciated you saying. One is the self-awareness. I think that that is so important. And someone put it on me one time where I was not reacting very well. I was not level by any means. And I think that is the goal. I think you're right. When you say trying to stay level as much as you can, that's emotional regulation. And
Yes.
that is something that can be trained, right? You're trying not to be too high, not too low. You might not be able to control the things that are happening around you, but you can control how you respond to those things. And that's what this person told me one time. I was up here. I was like not having it. And they looked at me and they said, Paige, like, you don't have control over this situation, but you do have control over how you're responding right now. And you're not really responding the best. And it was that moment where I was like, oh no, you kind of take a step back and you're like, you're right, and I was so grateful for that. And I love that you said criticism is an investment, because I did feel like that. Like I've never heard that before, but when you said that, I was like, that is exactly how I felt. And I think that it does matter that the people who are giving you that criticism are in your corner and they want you to win. We've all had
Right.
experiences with people who maybe aren't that way, but to have people who are in your corner. They want you to win, they want you to succeed, and they're telling you these things. I think it's important to take that to heart and to really ask yourself, is what they're saying valid? And in that moment when they said that to me, it was so valid. And it gave me ownership over what was going on. And I try to remember that every time there's a really elevated situation of like, okay, this is my opportunity to control the controllable. I can control my actions and reactions right now. And it is a lot of self-awareness and self-assessment that goes into that. So I really appreciated a lot of those things that you said because, to your point, we will talk a lot about wellness today, but there are some things that I think people don't realize can be trained, but you have to first have the awareness and then you have to have those steps and resources and you have to be willing to implement those things into your life. And it has to be an ongoing, daily, like one step in front of the other. It's a learning process that happens. My question to you is, you said before that when you were younger, maybe you didn't have the best view of law enforcement, that it
Right.
was negative, that you just didn't really think that um, maybe those experiences were something that you wanted to be in the beginning until you had mentors and you were able to really kind of see behind the veil of what was going on. How do you think that law enforcement can build a stronger relationship with the community so that there is more of that partnership?
Well, we could really go deep into this. I think that for years and years and years, we've just called it law enforcement because those are two words that certainly describe a profession. But man, I love the idea of talking about it from public safety or policing much more because to say that we're law enforcement officers, I use the analogy of that's the same as calling a nurse a phlebotomist. Can a nurse draw blood? Absolutely. But it's just a very small component of what a nurse's overall um, profession is when it comes to delivering care. And I look, and when we get new officers in and they're having their one-on-one with me before we offer them employment, I ask them, I want to hear their thought process. Tell me the difference between law enforcement and public safety.
Mm,
And I really need to hear their thought process around serving the community and community engagement. And law enforcement to me you could also look at it as if I just hire folks to enforce the law, then I'm just creating a culture of micromanaging the public
mm,
and over policing the public because now their job is to take a 750-page book of laws and drive around and look for violations of those laws. And nobody wants to be micromanaged at work. Why should you be micromanaged as you drive down the road? Because that book is so detailed that it's very difficult to drive down the road without making a mistake.
mm,
Like there's specific details about how far you need to stop from a stop sign, the right place to stop when you stop at a light. If you're turning right, then you need to go from the right lane to the right lane. But when you're turning left, you can go into either of those lanes. Like there's all of these little rules that'd be so easy to catch somebody, making a mistake every day. And I think that, in some areas there has been over policing of enforcing those laws, which has created a lack of trust because somebody just can't help but make a mistake and they just happen to make a mistake in front of a law enforcement officer. So guess what? Here comes the warning or the citation. And I think people are fed up with that. And I think people have a right to, the public has the right to choose how it's policed. And I believe that law enforcement is a dial. It's not an on-off switch. And
mm,
so if you have a stretch of highway that's never had a collision on it, that's never had a fatality on it, nobody has ever called and pointed out how unsafe it is, then why do we have motor officers hiding in the bushes, writing tickets for 5 to 10 miles an hour over the speed limit when the speed limit should probably be higher anyway? And so I think that we have an image to repair. And we could certainly argue the fact that, instances like George Floyd and others have set us back decades when it comes to our community relationships. Um, we can go way back in time to discuss, the reason that police aren't trusted and how they were used, for certain new elected officials that had a certain agenda that needed to be carried out, whether it's segregation in schools or, no public swimming, no public bathrooms, no shared water fountains. I mean, those are all, you know, um, put on police officers to enforce from, government policies and things like that. And so we have to get ourselves out of that and improve that image that we have of just being over enforcers or jackbooted thugs. I mean, you could just go down the list of all the things that we need to repair. And at the same time, I see thousands of interactions that go very well and very professionally and very caring that police officers, you know, um, you know, that occur every day in policing. And at the same time, all it takes is one video to ruin that. And that's the same thing with leadership. You could do everything right, all day, every day. And, all of a sudden you're at a Coldplay concert when you shouldn't be, and it ruins everything.
You did
So
not bring that up. That is hilarious.
whether it's an email, whether it's a Coldplay concert, no matter what it is, we are very vulnerable as leaders, and we got to show up because every little thing we say or do matters and is noticed and is written down, and so I really, try to take that all on myself. And I want to be the fittest. I want to be the most caring. I want to go first when it comes to, when I walk into a room and saying hello to everybody and being the first to shake hands and the first to smile. There's just a lot of things that I think we can do to help repair that. But the damage has been done. And for anybody that tries to, patrol the way that police officers used to patrol decades ago, is really missing an opportunity to connect with the public and do good things above and beyond just law enforcement.
Thank you for the reminder that words matter because I really believe that words matter. And I obviously have been saying this throughout the podcast, saying law enforcement, law enforcement, law enforcement. And so I appreciate you saying that. And of course, I've known these things and I've had conversations about this in different contexts before. And I am going to start saying public safety because I agree with you. I think that there's even just saying that public safety hit
Yes,
so much different than law enforcement. And
yes,
I agree with you. I think that there have been a lot of things that have created a divide. And what are the things that can start happening? And I agree with you too on all the other things about like you guys do great things every single day, and then it's that one thing that changes everything. And it almost like wipes, I almost think of like an etch-a-sketch, like you're
yes,
all day you're creating these beautiful pictures and these acts of service, and then one thing happens and the whole thing is just, you know,
yep.
what word am I thinking of? Shook,
House of Cards,
shook clean.
Sandcastle. Yeah, yeah. Wipe
Um,
the slate is wiped clean.
yeah. My question to you, because, and I do want to talk to you about leadership, but what an immense amount of pressure to be under. And it's hilarious that you said the Coldplay because that's so relevant right now. And it's true. I mean, that person had to put in their resignation, and just like that, it's their career, at least in where it is now, is over. How do you maintain authenticity as a leader with that much pressure?
I think just for my personal wellness, I have routines. Um, like I can tell you exactly my wake up routine, my gym routine, um, my nutrition routine. I have leadership routines also.
Mm.
And first and foremost, it starts, like I said, with positivity. So, and it's that consistency. We talk about um, successful leadership involves consistency, not intensity. And the stories that I like to tell all come from Simon Sinek. I've never met him personally, but I'm just a huge fan in what he's done for leadership
Mhm.
organizationally across the world. And I just, when he and Derek Miller and Chris and some others created the curve, I just immediately jumped on and said, I want to be a part of the curve and everything that he's trying to do for, improving our image. You want to call it social justice or police reform. I'm just looking at ways to improve our image and to serve our community better.
Yeah.
Um, but I check myself before I come in every day. I'm making sure that I don't have, I look at myself in the mirror, and that's a metaphor, but that's what I'm thinking about. How do I look today? Am I ready to smile? Do I have the energy ready to take this on? And it's that consistent behavior that happens every day that people start to notice and people start to create a movement around you. And so I don't expect for, to come in and inspire 30 people every day when I'm here or 2,000 people every day when I was in Austin. But man, I certainly can make a huge impact on the 5 to 10 of my closest um, direct reports.
Mhm.
And if they can take that positivity and they can take that sense of caring, pride, purpose, and then amplify it out, that's how major changes happen. And so that's what I like to do is I really like there's no way that I can be as close to, hundreds of people or even 30 people as I am to my closest direct reports. But man, I look back now and it fills me with pride to know that 23 now of my direct reports are either police chiefs or are sheriffs of major counties around here or are in an assistant police chief role at the Austin Police Department. That means so much to me that it inspires me even more to fulfill that purpose of wanting to serve those that serve, others, keeping them safe.
I have this theory that dedication trumps motivation every time. And,
Yep.
consistency is key. And I think that so many people, and it goes back to what we talked about you trying to be level. So many people are
Yeah.
riding these huge waves, which happens, we're human and we're never going to be perfect. There are going to be things that affect us, and there are going to be peaks and valleys, in our lives. I think the goal is always to try your best to remain level, but I think that if you are riding the waves and you are letting those things take you really high up and really down low, and you're waiting for motivation to come to do these things, it may never come or it's very fleeting. And so, to me, the consistency is trying to stay on that level path with regardless of what is happening in your life. Maybe things are really, really good, and maybe things really suck right now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you are continuing on that same level, consistent path minute after minute, day after day. And I agree with you that, and this is another one of my like things that I live by, but it's small steps create huge impact over time. And so
Yes.
if you can think about like one step at a time, one day at a time, one person at a time, then
Hmm.
over time, that is going to have a compounding effect.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love how Simon talks about the consistency because he'll say, if I told you to brush your teeth for 2 hours and then not brush your teeth for the rest of the year, you're going to have some serious,
Mhm.
dental hygiene issues. If you take a friend to the gym and you work out for 8 hours straight and then you look at yourselves in the mirror afterwards, you're not going to see anything. Do it for 5 days in a row and you're not going to be able to walk, but you're still not going to see anything in the mirror. But just 15 to 20 minutes a day after 6 months, you will absolutely see transformation. And that works physically, that works with relationships. She didn't fall in love with you because you remembered her birthday and sent flowers or brought candy. She fell in love with you because when you went to the refrigerator to get yourself something to drink, you also got her something to drink. When you walked towards a door, or when you guys walked towards a door, you always held it open for her. When you woke up in the morning, you held her instead of looking at your phone first, and when you come home from a day that was, not the best day, and she's telling you about her bad day, you don't interrupt her to say, no, 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 wait, 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 I need to tell you about my day. And so it's just those small, innocuous, consistent interactions that happen on a daily basis. It could just be as simple as walking down the hallway, asking somebody how they're doing, and actually listening to the answer.
Yeah.
Because we get in that instead of just saying hello, we ask how people are doing. Unfortunately, we don't wait around for the answer because we're walking into our office or we're on the phone. It's like if you're on the phone, it's probably not a good idea to ask somebody how they're doing when you're walking by.
Yeah.
So it's just being consistent and being intentional with how you communicate with people, and it all comes back to what you said: words matter.
Words matter. Yeah. I have a few peeves, and one of them you just mentioned, it's that like almost like obligatory, like, how are you, without really being interested in the answer. And you can tell right away when someone asks you a question and they're not really interested in hearing what you have to say, but they're just saying it. I would much rather someone not ask me in that moment than to ask me and not care. And so
Yeah.
I agree with you. And I also love that you said 10-15 minutes, because the number one excuse I always hear, or the number one like piece of pushback that I always hear is, well, I don't have time. And
Hmm.
so this idea that it has to be 8 hours or a 2 hour workout is not realistic, and it's also not necessary. You can do little 10-15 minute things every day, or even if you don't do it every day, even if you do it 5 times a week, for
Hmm.
15 minutes, it's going to have such a huge impact on your life. And so when people say that to me, well, I don't have time, it's like, well, you do have time. It's a prioritization of the time. It's creating that habit, it's creating that consistency, and everyone has 10 or 15 minutes that they can do to dedicate to their own personal wellness and um, evolution, maybe.
Yes.
Use that word.
Yeah, no, and I think regarding that consistency, sometimes you need reminders. It's real easy for me to just sit here at this desk and, you know, just get off into email and planning, strategic planning, looking at budgets and things like that. And when I started, people asked me to be their mentor. I was really honored by that. And I looked at it as, wow, I'm going to be able to help coach some folks. And one of the things that they really liked, and I just had a group of 5 at one time, and occasionally I would set a reminder on my phone to remind them to get up and get out of their seat. And so many of them have an open door policy, but do open door policies really work? Because it puts the impetus on your staff to come in, and their perception is they are interrupting you. So
Mm,
even though you're hiding behind the open door policy, you're really also putting too much pressure on them to use that open door policy. And so I prefer the empty chair policy, to where get your butt up, get out of your chair, leave it empty, and go walk around. So some people will call it manage by walking around. I just love the empty chair, empty seat policy. But I would send a little reminder text to these folks and just say, hey, it's time to get up out of your chair. Your folks cannot wait to see you.
mm,
And just something motivational or uplifting like that. And every single time 100% of them would reply back, thank you so much, that's exactly what I needed to do, and you're exactly right. Nothing but handshakes and high fives, walking down the hallway reminding me why I'm here. And so it's just those little consistent things, if you can think about. And again, use the calendar to your advantage. Use reminders to your advantage.
mm,
Um, but it just reminds me that leadership is a skill. It's not necessarily something that you're born with. It's something that we can learn. And I think that we learn equally from our positive interactions and role models in leadership, as well as those where you're just like, there's no way I would ever treat somebody the way that commander just treated that employee.
mm,
It's the same thing with parenting. We all have things that our parents have told us that we've told ourselves, if I'm ever a parent, or when I am a parent, there's no way I would ever do that to my child. I will never say those words to my child. And and so, yeah, I think of leadership as a lot, very similar to parenting. And but it's those consistent behaviors that we can learn through practice and through reading that I feel are so important. Just because I hand you a leadership book doesn't mean a year from now you're going to be a leader. Just because I hand you a guitar a year from now doesn't mean that you're going to be a great guitar player. You actually have to want to learn and really push yourself. And something I think about all the time is I've got this amazing guitar collection, and I've been playing guitar for 30 years. And so before you invite me to do a private concert for your friends, I have to tell you that I've had 2 lessons for a 6-month duration. So I had two different instructors for 6 months at a time during that 30-year period. So even though I have an amazing guitar collection, and I've been playing for 30 years, after about the 10th song, it's going to be on repeat.
Yeah.
So you'd think that me practicing for 30 years would make me some sort of an expert or master guitar player, when in reality, I've been playing 6 months of lessons for 30 years straight.
Mhm.
And it's no different from folks that have been in a lieutenant position for 10 years and think they know everything about leadership because they've been in a lieutenant position, when in reality, they've just been showing up to meetings and answering email. They haven't been learning new things. They haven't been putting themselves through training. They haven't been reading any more books. And so I like to use that analogy when I talk about leadership, is that just because you go to one class and they say, voila, you're now a leader, you have this certificate, they haven't taught you anything about having difficult conversations or making difficult decisions or how to weather the storm when morale is in the tank. And so it's just a lifelong learning process. And that's why I love calling leadership a journey,
Yeah.
because it ebbs and flows, it speeds up, it slows down, it goes through some, landmines and gets derailed. And, hopefully you can just, stay away from sabotaging it.
I think that too, like what you said, can be relatable to everyone, even if you don't have a leadership title. I remember us having a conversation offline, and I really appreciated the mindset of wanting to be the best at what you do and having that mindset of growth and learning. And I think that to your point, like if you want to be the best leader, if you want to be the best partner, if you want to be, the best whatever. It could really pertain to anything. But if you want to be the best, like you have to keep developing yourself. You have to keep learning. You can't just, like you said, take a few lessons and then be like, all right, I'm the best. It's never going to
Yeah.
happen that way. And in maybe some ways, like you're happy with your skill set on the guitars and you're like, okay, like I'm good. Like I like these 6, 10 songs and like I feel
Yep.
good. But if you want to be the best at what you do, and you want to show up as the best version of yourself, there's always this ongoing development that has to happen. And if you want to be in leadership, and I don't want to say beat out, but maybe rise above other
Hmm.
candidates, then you have to be willing to put in the work that maybe other people aren't willing to do. And I also really appreciate like you challenging maybe some of the words and the ways that things have been done in the past. I think that so often like we don't realize it, where we're using maybe words or we're doing things in the way that they have always been done. And so we don't challenge ourselves to go further or to think differently. And I think the open chair is one of those examples. I think that if people are saying, hey, like we have an open door policy and then it ends there, maybe the question is that the most effective? Are
Sure.
people coming to me? Are people feeling confident and like they can come to me with this open door policy? Or is there a better way to do things? And I think if you're always asking yourself, is there a next step? Is there a better way that we can do these things? And that could apply to anything. Then you're constantly in that learning and that development mindset as you go along in your career and your life.
Yeah, and I try to walk the halls, always thinking of asking the questions. And you have to build this into your culture, and it needs to be one of openness, and you need to actually listen when people tell you these things. But I'm always thinking, what should we start? What should we keep? And what should we stop?
Mhm.
And so, you can do extensive 360 evaluations, and, you could even pay for some very expensive employee surveys. But I think it's always important to just, as you're talking to people, just say, hey, do you have a certain idea that you think could revolutionize or just be a huge improvement to our organization? And at the same time, you need to ask the hard questions of, what are we doing every day that is just really stupid that we should stop? And you need to put your ego aside, because some of those things may be something you helped create and you take pride in. but it's important to be open enough and caring enough to be able to take that honest feedback. And I think that's important to, have a culture to where people feel comfortable in coming to you to be able to tell you these things. And so I think about that a lot. And I'd love one-on-one listening sessions, like especially for these folks that are like, I'm not charismatic. I don't know if I can be a good leader. I can't speak in front of a group. I get, terrified when I've got to go in and talk to 20 people or whatever. But what they don't realize is that the Bill Gates and the Mark Zuckerbergs and there's some very successful introverts in our history of greatest entrepreneurs. And one of the things I try to talk about when I talk about leadership is that there's a superpower for the introvert, and it's called the one-on-one. And it's so important for you to be able to have those one-on-one listening sessions to where you can show everybody how much you care. And leadership is so much more about just competence, but it's also about, people, uh, you know, uh, need to know how much you care. And they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Mhm.
And so, I like to repeat that a lot. But in these listening sessions, I'll say, hey, there's 40 things you do when you come to work every day. What are the two things that you absolutely love? And at the same time, I want to know the two things that you absolutely despise or hate. I mean, it's granted you have to do them because we're police officers, but I love to figure out. I know that when people are doing the things they love, they'll be in what I call the flow state, and I want as many people in their flow state when they're coming to work. So I've got some really young people in this organization, and man, they are so creative. They can create some amazing flyers and Canva.
Mhm.
They're great with social media and they love doing it. So, guess what? I don't have to spend any time on that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
If you just said, hey, Todd, I have this room full of monitors and it's nothing but spreadsheets, I need for you to go in there and make sure they balance every day. Like, that's not going to be an exciting day for me. I'd prefer not to deal with spreadsheets. I know how to use them. However, I need to find people that when all those spreadsheets balance and they're in that room, the confetti falls from the ceiling. Like, that's a wonderful moment for them. And so I need to figure out exactly everybody's little confetti moment that they have and try to place them in those roles that make them happy. Because when they're in those roles, they think about being successful and improving, those little parts of our organization on their time away. Like, they're at night, they're going to be thinking about it. On the weekend, they're going to be thinking about it just because that is their wheelhouse that they love to be involved with. So I think it's important as a leader to, really use that superpower of the one-on-one and really try to figure out what's going to challenge people and what they're going to love to do. And at the same time, if you have folks that love to do some things that other people hate doing, like you can remove some of that stress from some of those other folks. So that's
Yeah.
again just goes into trying to build a culture of support with a servant leadership mindset.
I really like the idea of, playing to people's strengths, but also understanding their weaknesses or like what they really don't like, and then being able to build a team based on those things. And if you don't ask the question, you don't know. So it's kind of that idea of how can you get to know your people? How can you show them that you care, but then how do they feel valued, Because if you are making them do these things that they really don't like, then maybe to them, they're like, well, they don't really value me and the things that are important to me because they didn't take the chance to get to know that I really don't like this, but I really like
Exactly.
this. So I also think that what you said is like it's a people, it's people with people, and people are going to buy into you as a person.
Hmm.
There's
Right.
this, and we're gonna use, since you brought the Coldplay thing up, we're gonna use like a little bit of like pop culture. So there's a show I'm watching right now on Netflix, and there's this girl who's so talented. She's maybe arguably one of the best people on this like reality show. She's a singer, she can dance, she's great,
Okay.
but she treats people terribly. And I'm like, she is so talented. She has so much experience. She's one of the best. She's at the top of her craft.
Hmm.
She treats people like garbage. And you can see how people respond to her. They're like, well, we don't really want to work with this person. We don't want to be in the same room as this person because she just talks down to us. She's really hard on us. Like, we don't, she's not a good person. And I was having this conversation with my family because we were talking about the show. And I was like, if someone wants to be successful, where people buy into this person and they follow this person, right? There's no way that they're going to do that if she continues to treat people that way. No one cares how talented you are if you don't treat them well. And so it just
Yep.
reminded me of that. It's like you could be the absolute best chief in the world, but if you don't
Yep.
treat people well, people aren't going to want to follow you.
Yeah, and I think people have a tough time understanding that there are people in the highest realms of organizations, and we do what they say because they have authority over us, but we would never follow them.
Yeah.
And to that same thought process, you could go into a police academy, somebody that's never had a leadership class, somebody that's, not even a police officer, but you can walk down and introduce yourself and you start to realize, oh, some of these people are absolutely leaders. And it's because they've chosen to take care of the person to the left of them and the right of them. And they're absolutely going to be amazing leaders because they are able to put others before themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's just so important. And the show that you're talking about, I mean, that's a master class in leadership because you find somebody that's super talented, but with no influence over everybody else. And
Yep.
we find that in private business as we find it in policing. We have somebody that nobody is a better homicide or robbery detective than this one person. Their work ethic, the way they close cases, and then all of a sudden they jump into a leadership role, and nobody can perform at the level that they used to perform at. But guess what their expectation is?
Mhm.
They expect everybody to perform at the level that they were so successful at, but they failed to understand that it's no longer about the work being done. It's about the people that are doing the work. And that's why it is a completely separate skill unto itself when we talk about leadership, because just because you're a high performer doesn't mean that you can be a leader of other high performers. No difference than, Michael Jordan being the best basketball player of all time, probably not going to be a great coach because when people are asking him specific things about how he does things, many of those things come natural to him,
Yeah.
or many of them evolved from 5 hours of practice every day for years and years and years. And so just because you've got somebody that's very skilled, oftentimes they really fail in a leadership role because they're never taught how to have that crucial conversation or make that difficult decision. They're just like, well, they're so good at this. They
Yeah.
can sell more than anybody else in the company, so let them manage other salespeople. And usually they
Yep.
fail without the proper tools.
Yeah. And I have direct experience with that for sure, in my life too. But I know that you have trained leadership, and we talked a little bit about this, but I was hoping that you could expand on your maybe top five leadership characteristics and some of the things that you think are the most important for leaders to understand or to um, um, develop over time.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to be selected to teach a leadership class, and if you really want to learn about leadership, either volunteer or be selected to teach a leadership class because it'll force you to do a deep dive and watch all the videos and read all the books and then start practicing. And after 10 years of teaching a servant leadership class, one of the things I do when I go around the room, I have everybody introduce themselves and name, grade, assignment, how long you've been there, but I also say you're the most important leadership trait to you. So I write them on the board, and I've heard them all. The unique thing is after I write, 20, 30, 40, depending on the size of the class, I'll look and say, which one of these are traits that can be taught in a class, or how many of these are actual character traits? And 95 plus percent of them are character traits. And I always thought that's interesting because when was the last time you went to character school? We pretty much go to classes for to be competent, for competency, because that's also important for leadership. We need to know what we're doing. But at the same time, it's just like, where's the trust class? Where's the empathy class? Where's the humility class? Like, it's hard to define all those until we start talking about those. And so, my top five, I'll just start off with positivity because I think positivity is so important. And I know that we've, spoken about that before, but nobody wants to go work for a negative leader. A negative leader is not going to get the tools and the equipment that's necessary. A negative leader is not going to be able to go and form relationships which are going to pay off for an agency or an organization down the road. Negative people are going to tend to be, by themselves, or maybe two or three other negative people. So I think positivity is huge. The next is humility. And I think it's so important to be a humble leader. And if somebody ever asked me, well, how do you define humble? And is there an example you would use that would show humility? And I would say, yeah, it's would be easy for me to say I have 30 years of police experience. I have 10 years of retail and restaurant management experience. So with all of that experience, you need to listen to what I have to say. I could also reframe that to say, after 40 years in leadership positions, I've made all the mistakes. And so I've got so many stories, and I would love to discuss the stories of my failures as well as my successes. And I think that we can have an excellent discussion on what we see in leadership that works and what doesn't. And so let's come together and let's share our stories. Completely different aspects of leadership and how you amplify your skills. You can say, it says chief right there, and I've got a dozen badges of all different ranks. That's why you should listen to me. You could also say, well, the only difference between me and an officer are, 5 100-question promotional tests and a few lucky Saturdays. And a lucky Saturday is what I call an assessment center, where you go in, and usually a department will bring in outside assessors to determine how fast you can think on your feet with different scenarios. And so that's what I can, always try to lead with humility, and never think of yourself as bigger than you are. Always remember where you come from. I love when people will say, Todd, he's a cop's cop. He's never forgotten where he's come from. When I hear things like that, it makes me think, okay, I'm doing some things right. Let's really work on staying humble.
Yeah.
The next is courage. It takes a lot of courage to become a leader, because you're ultimately responsible for everything that happens. And you have to really remove your ego, because guess what? Any of the good things that are happening in your organization, you have to give away all of that.
Mhm.
Like, you have to give the credit to everybody but yourself when good things are happening. And at the same thing, when a bad thing happens, you need to take 100% of that blame. And the great book by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin called Extreme Ownership and the Dichotomy of Leadership really pounds that in. If you want to complain that you have a micromanaging boss, don't blame your boss. Blame yourself. Look at yourself to determine, why is he micromanaging me? Why is she so upset at me all the time and wants all this information? And the answer to that is, I'm not communicating enough. I need to over communicate everything that we're doing here, so he or she stops asking all these questions. And so it's a unique perspective to have that extreme ownership. And I think that that's part of, the word courage. That's one of my favorites. The other one is empathy. I think being an empathetic, leader is very important. You can't just try to relate with people, and if somebody's having a bad day, and it's not the best leadership advice to just sit on the outside and say, hey, come on over, everything's going to be fine. I know it's kind of gloomy where you are, but where I'm at, the sun is out. It's wonderful over here. I think it's important to really understand and feel what somebody else is going through. So if somebody's sitting in the mud, um, it's it's not great for you to be holding the dry towel for them to dry them off. It's best just to get in the mud and sit with them. And I've seen way too many leaders that try to sit in the mud, but then they start talking about their own mud ritual. And so, empathy is not saying when somebody just loses a family member, empathy is not saying, oh, I know how you feel. I've also lost a family member. Empathy is just climbing in the mud with them and letting them know that you're listening, that you care, and you're just going to sit here as long as it takes. And where you're at right now, it really does stink. And I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise, but I'm going to sit here right with you for as long as it takes.
Mm.
And then the last one is trust. I think that trust is so important in a leadership role, and at the same time, a lot of people can't really define it. They don't understand how to build trust. It's kind of like culture. You hear culture over and over and over, but you really don't even know where to start with culture, what it really means, how it can affect everything in your organization. But trust, like I mentioned, comes from these small, innocuous interactions that happen over time and that consistency that happens over time. Um, I love how Simon Sinek says, it's kind of like a relationship with trust. It should take longer than 7 days. At the same time, it shouldn't take more than 7 years. He looks at it from the standpoint, if you started to date somebody and after the first date you told all your friends we're getting married, I think everybody's reaction would go, whoa, that's way too fast. It's going to take longer. And at the same time, if you've been with somebody for 7 years, not to be judgmental, but there will be people that say 7 years, like how long does it take? What's like, what's the holdup or whatever? And so I think that whether it's a relationship or trust, it happens just by being that, caring, consistent, positive person in somebody's life that ultimately will make you decide, that's Todd. He's my leader. He cares about me, and I would follow him to the ends of the earth.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's our role and hopefully our goal as a leader, to be able to have so many followers that we have influence over. And at the same time, I think that leaders are also very good followers, and they start off as very astute followers that are paying really close attention to the leaders that are meaningful in their life to hopefully, garner that influence over time to then become, that leader that they've always wanted to be. But I used to say my most successful times in my career was when I was an assistant chief and I had just chosen, 5 commanders to lead, and I could look around the room and at each one of them, I would say, I would be happy to hand you my stars and follow you and report to you. And we just had that close of a relationship, and it's so meaningful when you're able to find that in an organization that it just really helps you to amplify your message and to be a missionary or an evangelist for, just good, positive, caring leadership.
What I find to be really interesting is We've spent some time now talking about leadership, but there's this underlying message of wellness that is kind of woven throughout a lot of the things that you're saying. And I don't know if you've recognized that through our conversation, but you said reframing, and like mental reframing is
Mhm.
a part of wellness, right? Positivity is a part of wellness. Empathy, that's a part of wellness. Being able to, as a leader, be good physically and mentally so that you can lead from a position where you can make effective decisions, where you can, everything that you're talking about. I feel this like underlying message of wellness kind of woven throughout. And I want to maybe just like backtrack a little bit because I said
Mhm.
this in the intro. I said we're speaking to a wellness legend here, and I want to give it some context because I know that, in your previous agency, you became known as like the wellness guy throughout your agency. And I wanted you to maybe talk a little bit about how that got started and, the things that you did at your previous agency to start developing wellness tools and programming.
So I've always been very dedicated towards fitness, health and fitness. So whether it's triathlons, whether it's Ironman, whether it's, long distance cycling or swimming, weightlifting. I've had a gym membership. I was thinking the other day, it's been 45 years since I first got my first gym membership, and I've never been without a gym membership. And I've had a few surgeries over time, but I've never gone like 2 weeks without going to the gym. So it's just been part of my inner wellness spirit or drive, if you will. And so I brought that, as a brand new officer. I wanted to be a leader in the physical fitness categories, if you will. I didn't have to be first at everything, but I certainly did not want to be lagging in anything. And so I really worked hard to make sure that I could, be a leader in fitness. And I just gravitated towards healthy people. And when you do that, when you start talking about wellness for an organization, you tend to start getting some like-minded folks that are focused on wellness. And I volunteered to be a part of a critical incident stress management team in the mid 90s. And this is before peer support was a thing in many departments. I want to say that New York had one, maybe LA, but Austin certainly didn't. And and my critical incident stress management team would respond to officer-involved shootings in the Central Texas areas, as well as, crimes involving children and other traumatic events that officers, would come in contact with. And as soon as 9/11 happens and the Twin Towers fell, my team was getting the phone call, and we had plane tickets and not the best accommodations. We stayed in at the YMCA just down the street from Ground Zero, with a lot of other folks that were, experiencing homelessness. So it was not any kind of a, Ritz-Carlton for sure, but we would show up every day, and we scheduled meetings with first responders that were there and witnessed the devastation of that attack. And so we debriefed hundreds of not just police officers, but also firefighters. And in asking about the organization that was facilitating all of this, it was the acronym was PAPA, POPPA, and it standard for Police Officers Providing Peer Assistance. So that was the first introduction I had to an organized peer support group that was agency supported, and they put it in place years earlier because there was dozens of officers in NYPD, which had 40,000 members, then dozens of officers would kill themselves, commit suicide every year. So it was to address that. And then all of a sudden you have this catastrophe and this devastation and this loss of life, which just led to even more um, suicides. And we did our very best and saw some, serious wellness struggles within both fire, EMS, you name it. But I mean, I know that you've discussed this before with other guests, but you know, the police officers in the fire department, we're not the only ones seeing and hearing things. There's dispatchers, there's crime scene techs that are out there for days on end, taking, macro photographs of body parts and the devastation that's going on, and everybody is affected that is working in these agencies. And so anyway, we, brought that training and all of the repetitions of that devastation and all of those debriefs back to Austin. And I was on a panel that was impaneled by the then Chief Stan Nee, and he wanted to know what we could do for wellness and if peer support was something we could have in our future. And so we were on a panel for, a couple of years before, I want to say, the first peer support team rolled out in Austin in 2005.
Mm.
And I would have gladly taken over that role, but I just accepted a position as sergeant on the SWAT team. And it was just kind of like a long-standing goal of mine to do that. And since I had just been accepted to the team, I certainly wasn't going to quit. But I've always just kept um, my my hands in the pot when it comes to peer support and all of the members of the full-time team. Like right now, there's 5 officers and a full-time sergeant. Um, they do so much work that the department never really understands or really knows how to quantify. Um, I know when I was an assistant chief over wellness, there was a special folder that was peer supports folder. And I specifically said, I do not want access to that. Even though it's in my area of responsibility, I felt it was paramount that confidentiality remained just that. And so we had officers in inpatient, outpatient, long-term counseling, all types of restorative measures to give them care. And I didn't want to know anything about the details as long as we're handling that and taking care of our officers. Um, you know, then that was great. The wellness program in Austin also was, very robust from the sense that it had 55 crisis counselors or victim services. And not only did they provide that service to the community, but also internally. And then we had psychological services, which has 2 psychologists that work full time, and as well as a fitness and nutrition consultant. We've actually had somebody that would come and conduct yoga classes from time to time on a voluntary basis, which was very helpful. And it's just very important to make sure that you know the holistic aspect of wellness was addressed. And so not only do you have physical wellness, but you have emotional wellness. There's a financial wellness that can really impact officers and professional staff also when they can't pay their bills. And then you also have relational wellness, and so we had marriage counselors and other couples counseling that would go on, and really wanted to make sure that we had some ongoing classes and seminars and things like that that we could provide. And then most recently, I guess in the last couple of years, we started doing wellness trips to the coast. So we would have a kind of like a fishing trip, and it would be all centered around wellness, about unplugging, about recharging, and just having that rejuvenation of being off call, off from work. A lot of times it was team centered. So we'd try to get a whole team. Sometimes there's an actual team that was involved in an officer involved shooting or some sort of a critical incident where they all saw something horrible. So we try to schedule those trips around their days off where they could participate. And, it's no magic pill or anything like that, but I can tell you the efficacy of just the comments that I had afterwards of appreciation. I had no idea our department did such a thing, thought so much about wellness. It was just really, it meant a lot, for me to be a part of that. And we still have these trips that go on, especially like the week of 9/11. I know some different groups that'll host these wellness trips, and some are golf trips, some are, camping trips, but, fishing has always been a popular one also. So those are just kind of the way Austin looks from a wellness standpoint, kind of how it got started of, me and another team, some other team members that went to the devastation after 9/11 in 2001, and I can't believe it's been 24 years. It's
Yeah,
unbelievable.
that's wild. You had said this before, and I really appreciate the mentality of it's not a one size fits all, and there is a holistic approach to wellness, and it's so dynamic, and I think the words that we use matter too. And sometimes if someone's not on board with that word holistic, although I think, things are changing and things are evolving, but there's a dynamic approach to wellness and, excuse me, and understanding that some people are going to resonate with some things and maybe not with others, but having different pillars of like, this is what we think is important from a broad, like zoom out of what wellness looks like. I think that right now there's a little bit of mentality, and I don't know if you can relate to this or if you've seen this at all, because I know every state and every department is different. But what I'm hearing is there's almost this mentality that wellness is just kind of a buzzword at this point. And maybe there's a lot of talk, but not a lot of action when it comes to wellness support. And there's still maybe a little bit of stigma associated with wellness. I have maybe a two-part question for you. One is, what do you think is the true why behind wellness tools and wellness programming, or what is the true definition of wellness and why is it so important? And two, like, how can we get people to recognize the importance and take action for themselves?
Well, I think the why is part of the resilience. It's like we don't just want to work as police officers for 2 years or 5 years, and as an agency, we want to have people spend their whole lives, their whole working lives in our agency and serving. And, you know, there's going to be different seasons that happen within your whole career. And you could be exposed to a lot of trauma as a patrol officer, but maybe not so much as the detective. And then as a sergeant or your, frontline manager, if you will, you're going to potentially see some more, but now you're also seeing your officers that you're responsible for experiencing trauma, and it's important to make sure that you understand the importance of wellness as it relates to resiliency and as it relates to retention.
Mm.
I've seen way too many officers that go, you know, I guess, unaccounted for, and they get lost. And many times it's a leadership fail to where this officer gets lost, and this officer starts committing, policy violations, maybe a little bit more use of force than is necessary, maybe some internal affairs cases for rudeness. And, that leads into it's important to have an early intervention system also, to make sure that somebody, it should be the ultimate responsibility of that frontline supervisor to know if you have employees that are doing this and they're staying steady, and all of a sudden one's up here or one's down here, it's to be able to stop and have those one-on-one conversations and what I call check-ins, just to make sure that they're, just a wellness check-in to make sure that they're doing okay. But we've seen, many leadership fails. It's not just about checking the box as a chief or, command staff to say, we have a wellness program, check. No, you have to be the one setting the example. You have to be talking about wellness. You have to be welcoming when people have problems to help them find solutions. And you have to have much more than just a policy and a unit, if you will, that's staffed. You have to make sure that they are being promoted and that message is getting out. There needs to be a way for officers to feel comfortable and confidential in speaking with your wellness team. And at the same time, especially in small departments, it's just like all eyes are on everybody all the time. Everybody know who's dating who, what they eat, what their schedule is like. If somebody comes in 5 minutes late, and so it's a big concern for a small department. So I encourage people here to go outside of our department. We don't have a wellness division in this small department, but we do have, surrounding, public safety partners that we can reach out to, that together we can have a wellness team, but it may involve 4 or 5 different agencies, no different than a SWAT team. Like our agencies are so small, it doesn't have, there's not a SWAT team at one agency. It's a combined regional SWAT team. So we have combined regional wellness efforts with it, whether it's peer support, debriefing after certain incidents. And so I think it's important as chief to make sure that I stay connected so I can promote those things. And at the same time, I just can't expect everybody um, to be 100% on board with wellness. And so the best way I can, you know, ensure that happens is to set that example. And
Mhm.
so I talk wellness all the time. It's like somebody's bringing the unhealthy snacks, I'm going to make a comment, right? Criticism is investment, right? So
Yeah.
um, if somebody brings in all the unhealthy snacks, I'm probably going to say something. At the same time, I encourage people to be healthy. Like when we go out in uniform, we're being sized up all the time. We're just like, oh my gosh, that cop's so overweight. That was something that you reminded me of when we were talking as a brand new officer. It's just like I would size certain officers up. I was just like, oh my gosh, that guy is 400 pounds. How is he going to chase somebody? So I was very mindful of that as a new officer. Like you couldn't pay me to be in a donut shop as a police officer. And I wanted to look as fit as possible, and I wanted to be as tucked in and polished and pressed as I could possibly be. And lo and behold, those that are the most fit, pressed, and polished have the least challenges on the streets for people that want to fight them,
Yeah.
because we're being sized up all the time. And people are just like, well, if he takes care of his uniform and his body and his hair and everything else like that, he probably knows how to fight. So I'm not even going to bother.
Yeah.
So
I
hopefully that answers some of that.
It did. No, and I had a chief one time say that fitness is the first line of de-escalation. And it's kind of what
Yeah.
you said is like if someone is sizing you up and they're like, I can take them or I can beat them in a foot race,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then the opposite is true of someone being like, man, I don't
Yeah.
really want to take that guy, or I don't think I can get away from this guy. He looks like he's pretty tough. He
Yes.
lifts or whatever. And
Yes.
one of
Yes.
the questions I had written down, but you answered it, was, do you think it's essential for leadership to lead by example? And, you answered that question for me, so thank you. But, one of the things in my life that I realized early on is you can't, like, people don't like to feel like they're being forced to do
Hmm.
things, right? Like there's always going
Yep.
to be like a certain level of resistance to that. And I'll put this in like a really simple example. I was in a relationship one time where I was like, I think that you should eat healthier. And
Hmm.
they were like, no thanks, right? And I
Yeah.
was like, and it was this over and over, like, well, I think you should eat this. I think you should eat that. I think you should do this. And they were like, nope, nope, nope. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to do that. And so I started prioritizing myself. I started leading by example in a way of like
Hmm.
taking care of myself physically, mentally, nutritionally. And then eventually they were like, oh, like I want to look like you or feel like you or do the things. And so it naturally happened because I think when you are showcasing all of the benefits of these,
Yes.
then
Yep.
other people are like, well, I want those same benefits. I think people want the outcome. They don't always necessarily want what it takes to get the outcome, but the outcome is worth striving for. So if you see someone who starts to lose weight and you also want to lose weight, then you're willing to maybe take those steps to get that final outcome. And so I agree that I think leading by example is a powerful way to get other people to buy in. And I think also to your point, it's never ever going to be perfect. And maybe not everyone is ready yet, but the idea is that it's a consistent effort over time. And maybe someone's not on board with wellness today, but maybe a month from now or 2 years from now, they will be because it's something that's continually reinforced and showcased to them over time.
Yeah, I heard somebody say that your body is just a billboard that is showcasing your discipline and your habits. You
Yeah.
know, so why not take advantage of it? Why not be in the best shape possible, especially in leadership roles? You know, it's no different than, I was dealing with a foot injury one time, and the doctor that was treating my foot, was, you know, over 300 pounds, and was then going to try to give me running advice as to get back on my feet after my foot started to heal. And I'm looking at somebody knowing full well that they've never run ever. And, I'm just like, okay, how about we just fix my foot? I'll worry about the running part later, and it's the same thing when, you see somebody with a PhD in nutrition that their body does not look like they are nutritious at all. And so it's important if you really want to have the influence. And again, you're not a leader unless you have influence. Otherwise, you're just holding a position. And we do what you do what you say because you have authority over us. But if you really want to have people follow you, and you want to have influence and influence them in a positive, caring way towards making sure our communities are safe, it starts with you. And you cannot care for anybody else unless you're caring for yourself. And I believe that all leaders or people in leadership roles really should question, just their overall health. And another part of the wellness puzzle that I completely left out, unfortunately, was the spiritual wellness.
Mm,
I meant to tell you at Austin, there's 12 to 15, depending, on what's going on, but 12 to 15 volunteer chaplains.
yeah.
And so that chaplain program was very successful there, and they were there anytime, anytime an officer got transported to the hospital or was involved in a critical incident, the officers could easily say, "Nope, I don't want any religious guidance at all." And then others would say, "No, I'd prefer, I'm Jewish, I'd prefer a rabbi. I'm Catholic, I'd prefer a priest." But just to be able to have that out there. And then we had some really great spiritual advisors that were non-denominational and would just sit down and talk to you about life in general. So it was just a whole, you know, we keep saying holistic, but it was certainly a very wide array of responsiveness that we had in helping people in their wellness.
Yeah, I think it's really funny. Like so many things you say, I really align with. And I learned this early on. I don't want to take advice from someone who's not the example of what that is, right? And so,
Right?
this can be in so many different contexts, right? It's like, are you going to take relationship advice from someone who doesn't have a successful relationship or doesn't know what it's
Right.
like to be in a successful relationship?
Right.
And are you going to take business advice from someone who doesn't own a successful business or like, hasn't been involved in the success of a business? So I
Yeah.
think that when you can look at it from that perspective, and especially if you are a leader, you want people to take your advice and you want people to take advantage of the resources and the tools that you're putting out there. Are you an example of what those things are? Are you prioritizing your own physical and mental wellness? Are you eating healthy? Or are you showing up, like you said, with donuts every day?
Hmm.
And I also am a fan of like, I don't want to say gray area, but a little bit. I think that like there might be times where you eat cake and that's
Oh
okay.
yeah. Yeah.
Like you're going to be at a kid's birthday or eat cake and that's okay. It doesn't have to be so like black and white, it's this or nothing. I think that there is like that space in between, but I think that we are looking to the people who are giving us advice, and we're like kind of scoping them out, and we're like, okay, are they legit? Like, are they living and breathing this too? Like, have they had success in these areas too? Because to your point, I don't want to take running advice from someone who's never ran a day in their life, you
Yeah,
know? So
not a good idea to have financial advice from somebody who's broke.
100%, 100%. So I appreciate that. I know that we're kind of running a little bit short on time, so I did want to mention something. So you retired in 2020,
Yes,
and then we had George Floyd. The George Floyd incident happened shortly thereafter. And
yes.
you started helping leaders and kind of training them and helping them through this hard time that was happening. And then you, a couple years later, ended up coming back and you're in your current position. I was hoping that maybe you could give your insights into, and I know we kind of mentioned this earlier, like the setback that happened and the stress that you were seeing, and maybe the advice that you would give to someone who is still maybe trying to build a wellness program or to build, I know you mentioned culture a few times, to build a healthy and successful culture. Because I talk to leaders across the country that still don't have wellness programming and still maybe feel like there is a broken foundation when it comes to culture. And so, can you maybe give a little bit of insight into some of the things that you experienced during that time and how you've helped other people to develop a stronger, healthier culture and advice for building a wellness program?
Well, certainly George Floyd happened towards the end of May in 2020, and I had just retired May 1st of 2020. So I was traveling at the time, doing a lot of camping, just doing what, I'd always wanted to do in retirement. But then I saw the news stories. I saw Austin police cars getting burned, on fire, rocks and bottles flying. It was really tough for me to watch because I was a few states away. Um, at the same time, my friends were reaching out to me, and I have friends that are on the front line experiencing that. Everybody that worked those riots and protests got COVID because of the close proximity. Within a year's time, there was 4 officers that died from COVID due to exposure in and around that event. So very traumatic. Lots and lots of servant hearts were running out the door. They joined the police department for the same reason I did, to go where all the people are that need help and to help them solve their problems, to make the world a better place. And now they're being asked to don riot gear and stand out in the one of the hottest summers on record in Austin, Texas, for 10 hours a day, 10 hours a day. And they're not just wearing a normal police uniform. They're wearing riot gear with helmets and elbow pads and shoulder pads and heavier vests and it's unbelievable what they went through, and really through no fault of their own. Like they didn't know George Floyd, but it was just the community's reaction to what happened, and they wanted to take it out on the nearest uh, city and police station that they could. And Austin was, unfortunately, being the state capital, was ripe for that. And so I really did my best to just be, a guide and a calm sense of, what they were going through, and to offer that guidance and support. And so it was those that were on the front line, as well as the officers that I used to work with, um, in executive staff as part of the team. So it was pretty, a solemn time, to be able to do that. And so I eventually ended up being asked to come and help lead the wellness division, and do whatever I could to make improvements. And then was able to replace myself with somebody permanent and move on to teaching and coaching leadership, working on mentorship. We developed a mentorship for a program and peer support program actually for retirees
Mm.
because that was such a huge issue. And I was experiencing that myself as soon as you do your outboarding and you turn in all your equipment and you walk out that door, you're no like you hear that click of the door locking and you're no longer allowed inside without an escort. You can't walk inside that building and go to the restroom that you cussed for 25 years because it was always leaking nasty water drippings, asbestos. Like everybody's got complaints about their old police facilities, but this is a prime example of that. You couldn't even go in there without an escort anymore. So a lot of retirees were struggling also. And the fact that they couldn't come help, they couldn't put a uniform on, their career is over. I spoke to many retirees who used to save that bottle of, Eagle Rare or Buffalo Trace for special occasions, and now it's just becomes lunch. And so we had lots of issues with alcohol and how to deal with that. So we created a peer support team just for retirees, but that would also supplement the full-time peer support team also, because you didn't realize that at some point your retirees are higher or larger in number than your actual acting or active officers. So there was a huge need for that. So to answer your question of how do you get something started, you need some people that are passionate about wellness, and it's just going to be up to them to, you know, to just raise the flag and call a meeting and have a regular lunch. And you've got to be able to start planting those seeds and have some people start doing some research and getting organized. There's enough peer support teams that are actively involved in so many police departments now that it's incumbent upon us and leadership to reach out. Um, and I think it's important for all of us to seek out mentorship, but it's also important for all of us to seek out wellness.
Mm.
Wellness isn't just going to happen organically overnight. You may have some people that are interested in it, but you certainly don't want to try to be creating a wellness program after some significant event, um, because it's important that you do it right. You can't get it wrong. And once the trauma's happened, that's not the time to try to figure it out.
I love the idea of proactive wellness, and I think that it's always harder to be proactive than reactive. But I agree. I think that if you can start getting ahead of issues before there's an issue, then when there is a big issue, you're prepared. You know,
Exactly.
and it goes back to, you talk about training. Like you guys, you do all this training so that you are prepared for when these things happen. And I think the same has to be for wellness. Like, how can you do all this training ahead of time in preparation for what you know is going to come? I heard this saying that I really liked. It was, if it's predictable, it's preventable. And, we know that there are going to be critical incidents. We know that there are going to be injuries. We know that, all these things are going to happen if you don't do anything about it. And so, how can you prevent some of those things from happening? And it might not be complete elimination. There may never be injury elimination, but how can you reduce the risk proactively? How can you try to reduce or prevent those things from happening? Maybe you're never going to be able to eliminate suicide, although I hope that that is what we can get to one day. I think that that is something to strive for, but how can you get in front of it? How can you be proactive to reduce that before there's this big issue? Because we already know the things that tend to happen. So if it's predictable, it's preventable. Um,
Yep.
I love, and I have never heard this. I have had 100 plus, probably now about 125 guests on this podcast, and I have never heard a peer support team for retirees and including your retirees in your peer support teams, to give them purpose and to make them feel like they have resources once they retire, because we do know that's a tricky transition and you feel like you lose everything and it's lonely. And like you said, there are things that tend to happen with coping mechanisms and I've never ever heard a peer team for retirees. I think that that is very smart and needed.
I read a book from Arthur Brooks called Strength to Strength, and it talks about our strengths in our 20s and 30s and even 40s is much different than the strengths that we have in our 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Mhm.
And it has to do with fluid intelligence as well as crystallized intelligence. But with the take I got on it are the highest graded college professors are all in their 60s and 70s and 80s. They're not out there inventing new things or getting brand new grants, but what they're doing is telling a lifetime of stories that are so meaningful to the students that the students can relate and learn and grow from it. And they've moved from one strength into another that has become a superpower for the people that are in that age group. And after I read that book, I thought, we have people that are retiring at 44 years old and leaving the department. You know, the universities, you're going to see people in their 60s and 70s and 80s walking the hallways. You don't have that in policing. We don't have those stories. We don't have the ability, to be able to talk to somebody with that type of experience and those stories when we're having bad days. And I just thought, how can we improve that and close that gap to where once you retire and you walk out that door and that door clicks, like how can we get them back in here? And I
Yeah.
thought to myself, I'm like, these retirees are having coffee every single morning somewhere all around town. Why can't they be having the coffee at our substations? Why can't, Friday be at the academy and Thursday be at the North Sub and Tuesday be at the South Sub and just make it a place. And it's like, if the cost of coffee is an issue, I'll write the check, but like we should not be repelling all of that experience and knowledge and all of the things that they've been through. And so, it took a while because we've got some, access issues with, confidential information. And so there's access privileges and credentials for those certain areas. But I just thought, yeah, but every place has a break room. Every substation has a lunchroom or a break room, and how can we incorporate it? And so that just then evolved into, well, how about we get some of these retirees, in peer support and put them through some training and give them an access card and then see what happens from there. So I'm hoping I know that only great things will come from, at least thinking in that way. And it, like I said, it came from reading a great book called Strength to Strength and just me feeling how lost I was and out of touch with, wow, all my friends are just behind that glass door and the door doesn't open anymore. And now I have to call the help desk and actually have somebody come down and escort me around, which is just really strange to me. But all retirees are feeling that way. And in military bases, it's a little bit different because all of the retired military or former military have access to the PX to where they can go back on base, they can do some shopping, they can, find other like-minded folks to be able to talk to, and they don't even have to talk about combat. They just talk about life in general. So it was fun to be a part of that creation.
I absolutely love that. I think that that is so great, and I hope that people who are listening will adopt that too, because I think that that's fantastic. In
Me
the
too.
context of, you're like, me too. Um, so in the context of being a wealth of knowledge and having wisdom to give, what words of wisdom would you give to someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
Positivity, again, we keep talking about it, but it's so important. Positive attitude. And what you're doing with positivity and a positive attitude is you're creating a reputation. And I cannot emphasize enough how a reputation will follow you throughout your whole career. And if if your reputation is that, it's a great person to be around, he's so positive, um, it goes a lot when you're looking to be in a specialized unit because nobody wants to hire the stick in the mud or the negative person, the Eeyore. Like everybody wants to be around positive when they're looking for new folks to come in. So whether it's a specialized unit, if it's a certain shift you want to be on, that positive attitude can go such a long way in helping your reputation, get you the assignments that you're interested in. And I also want to emphasize is that mentorship is it goes from the bottom up. Like nobody is ever going to come to you and say, I want to be your mentor. So it is paramount that you find people that you consider to be role models and go up to them and ask for coffee time with them, ask for a lunch with them, let them know that you really admire them and everything they've accomplished and the path that they've chosen in their leadership journey is something that you want to emulate. And would you be my mentor? Like that's the only way mentorship works. It cannot work the other way going down. But you'd be surprised how many people will free their schedule, will take a vested interest in you. And, oftentimes they're going to be of higher rank. They're going to be of a different generation, but you can learn so much from that. And it's free of charge and just waiting to be asked.
Thank you.
Sure.
I appreciate your time so much. And I know maybe you're running a little bit over. So if you have time and there's anything we missed, let me know and you can kind of take the floor. But that's all I have for you. And I really, really do appreciate you coming on here and sharing all of your insights on leadership and wellness. It's been really great.
Yes, no, I'm happy to support. I love being out of retirement and back working and being a leader of the men and women that wear the uniform and work so hard to protect and serve our communities. And feel free to share my contact information with anybody that reaches out. I'm happy to discuss wellness. I'm happy to discuss what it's like to come out of retirement and compete for a chief's job.
Mhm.
I'm happy to talk about progressive policing and all the things we need to do to start talking about public safety instead of just law enforcement.
Yeah.
And any and all, I'm more than happy to talk with you or any of your followers. So thanks you for having me on.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I feel like we're going to need a part two at some point.
All right, get
Thank
some more
you.
questions.
I will. Take care.